In this module, we're going to be looking at SASE and certificate pinning and how certificate pinning is handled by a SASE platform, or what are some of the challenges around that. So before we dive deeper into that, one of the things I want to highlight here is this is part of a TLS connection here. This is part of that initial client hello connection actually happens, and this is a client-side function. So just keep that in mind as we are kind of like moving ahead here, right? So where do we start? Okay, so let's start on the web server here, right? So on the web server, we can see a certificate that's installed there. And as part of a TLS connection, the client is going to send a client hello as part of that initiating that TLS connection. And the web server is going to present its certificate, basically the public key, right? So what the client does is it checks with a pinned certificate. So a pinned certificate that's installed on the client. And it matches if the certificate provided by the web server to the client matches the certificate, the public key that is actually on the actual client. If it does, then the TLS connection goes ahead and is established. If it doesn't match, then the client thinks there is a man-in-the-middle attack, because technically in man-in-the-middle kind of attack here, the client will send a client hello, and when the certificate that is presented back won't be of the actual web server, it'll be its own malicious one, and the client is able to compare the two, and it's not going to match, and the connection kind of fails. So if we go down to the kind of like the SASE model here, right, you can kind of see like visually that it does kind of resemble a man in the middle, right? And it is to all extents and purposes, right? There is this entity in the middle. And typically what happens is the client makes a connection to the SASE, and then the SASE connection makes a second connection to the actual web server. So in actual fact, we have two TLS connections here, right? Now, let's kind of like dive a little bit more deeper into the actual the SASE platform. So the SASE platform typically issues a trusted man-in-the-middle cert. Okay, so this cert is actually signed by the SASE Intermediate Certificate Authority or by the customer's intermediate certificate, but there is a trusted intermediate certificate actually there. So what actually happens is, in this kind of scenario, the client's going to make the initial connection to the SASE platform, and this certificate is actually going to be presented back to the client, not this one over here, okay, not the web server. So then what's going to happen is the client is going to compare the trusted man-in-the-middle certificate provided by the SASE platform with the actual PIN certificate. And obviously it's going to fail because they're not going to match, right? So in that instance, what's actually happens is once that determination is actually made, and the connection is not going to work there, typically what happens is the client will either actually send a finish, okay, to the SASE provider, or a reset. Okay, and basically the connection is going to stop there. Now, the challenge here is there is nothing in the actual TLS protocol or in the actual the pinning of certificates, etc., for the SASE provider to determine or make an exception for pinned certificates. There's nothing in that framework in itself here. So as part of that protocol, as part of that framework here, since there's nothing in there, how do we fix the problem here, right? And also, there's no specific message coming from the client to the SASE platform to kind of indicate that there is a certificate pinning going on here, right? So typically there is no way to kind of like handle that kind of situation. So since we can't handle it, what is the alternative option that we have? Okay, so one of the strategies that we could do is when that traffic comes into the SASE environment for that specific web server, okay, which is using a pinned certificate. Oh, it doesn't have to be a web server. So I just want to highlight here, for simplicity, I'm just using a client and a web server, right? The client could be a mobile application, it can be an application, and the web server could be backend infrastructure, it can be application servers or something like that. But the application on the central side is kind of pinning something on the client application. So there is something there. But just for simplicity, I'm using a client and a web server. So one of the solutions to this, and it really isn't a clean solution, this is still one of the challenges with SASE providers, right? Is the client's going to make that connection come into the SASE environment, and typically what you would do is you will simply bypass that traffic from SSL, TLS inspection, and then pass that traffic to the web server. So in that respect, that connection that I just highlighted here, once that connection goes all the way to the web server, it's then going to naturally receive the certificate back from the web server. Now, is that solution ideal? Probably not. But let's just think about that a little while, right? In terms of like a policy management here, right? Most, when you're inspecting traffic, you may, as an organization, you may say, okay, anything destined towards medical, right, which is hospitals and affiliations and things like that, you don't want to inspect the traffic, and you can allow that traffic to go through. Again, another strategy may be for like financials, right? So financial institutions, banking, and that kind of stuff, where you don't want to inspect that traffic. That traffic can go straight to the end destination, right? So, while you're actually just passing that traffic through, it could be part of a broader policy management strategy where you're not inspecting certain types of traffic. So that kind of concludes today's module. Thank you.